Welcome back to another episode of the Heroes Veritas podcast. I don't know what happened there with my voice, but if you're just joining us, I'm your host, Tim Bass, and we are on a mission, a journey, I don't know what else to call it, but my goal is to make a micro percentage shift in society by reclaiming the masculinity in men through a series of podcasts and events and connection. So if you're just joining us, that's what we're here to do. Before we get started, as always, I'd like to go into announcements. As it sits, the day that this drops, you will have 5 days before registration closes for the May 7th camping trip, men's only retreat, workshop, whatever you want to call it. But I'm really looking forward to meeting everybody that's already signed up. It's going to be an absolute blast. I have some really cool things planned for everyone, and we're going to eat, learn, converse, grow. We're just going to have a blast. It's going to be cool. So I hope to see you out there. If you have any questions, concerns, worried about something, I've heard some people say that they're worried they're not physically capable to do the hike. I've heard some people complain that it's too expensive for just camping. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, leave a comment. Just give me an opportunity to talk to you, because I really think that everybody should go to it. I think it's an absolute amazing opportunity to connect with other men, but also to grow and learn and strive to be the ideal. And again, you have 5 days from the time that this podcast drops to get registered. That's going to be May 7th through the 9th. It's going to be in Northern California, near Graygle, and I hope to see you guys there. That being said, let's get into today's topic. Now, if you're part of the mailing list and you've been following along with the articles that I've been releasing, you've noticed that there's been conversations around principle, being a principled man in a society that's kind of upside down. We've talked about fear. And last week we talked about echo chambers, and that was the impetus behind that was because I've been having a lot of conversations lately where my intention, my goal of the reclamation, what I'm looking to surround myself with, has been misrepresented either by myself or by misunderstandings. And so the idea struck me odd that when I say set the perimeter, some are seeing it as me seeking my ego being stroked. Some are receiving that as what I'm saying is I want yes men, I want people around me that only make me feel good, that never challenge me. I'm just looking for people to be at my beck and call. And it's led to some pretty deep conversations with some individuals, but it's also led to some pretty harsh conversations with others. I'm a pretty patient person, but when you assassinate my character or try and, what's the word I'm looking for? Misrepresent my character, I tend to be a little bit sharper, as well most men should be. If you're going to stand on principle, you should be aware and willing to cross that line should somebody continue to attack. But in that, I also realize my onus in maintaining that understanding. And so while I did set a line with some people that they did not feel I was tactful enough or respectful enough or whatever the case was, and that's their opinion and that's fine, I do share the responsibility of that misunderstanding because I haven't sat down and explained in depth what I mean by setting the perimeter, what are some of the nuances within setting a perimeter, some of the pitfalls. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do today in a relatively quick podcast episode. We're going to be discussing what I keep referring to as setting the perimeter and what the pitfalls of setting the perimeter are, things to avoid, what you need to do as a prerequisite to setting a perimeter, and what you should be seeking when cultivating the perimeter. So before I get into kind of the pitfalls, the hows, the whats, the whys, I want to kind of discuss what I mean by, well, let's define set the perimeter, and give a little history lesson from my perspective of how that concept developed, how that language came to be. So when you've heard me say set the perimeter a lot, and a lot of times I say set the perimeter, it comes into the form of tuning out noise or fine-tuning who you're listening to. And in that, I understand where the misunderstanding that I'm saying, hey, set the perimeter to only people that make you feel good, people that give you the warm fuzzies, people that are agreeing with you, so on and so forth. So I understand where that misunderstanding is coming from. So if we take it a step back, this is probably 10 or 15 years ago. And, my father and my grandfather have always set very stringent masculine values in me, which I'm very grateful for. I didn't understand it growing up, and it caused some conflict and some contention when I was entering society post-military. But I'm very appreciative and grateful for it because it's really set the tone for everything that I do. And during that time, I'm in my 20s, late teens, early 20s, trying to find my way in the world. And I remember watching a movie. I think it was a movie. It could have been a book that I read, but I'm pretty sure it was a movie. And in that movie, there's a man similar that I resonated with, that character, that archetype, and he was seeking an understanding of priorities in his life. And I believe, and again, it's been a long time, it might not even been a movie, but I believe in that moment, in that scene, for lack of a better term, that character was wrestling with the knowledge that he had to make a decision that would negatively impact one side or the other. And in that scene, there was the guide, which is common in the hero's journey, who's sitting there giving advice. And in that advice, it was, there are some men that have a circle that is restricted to themselves. Some men have a circle that extends to their immediate family, wife, children. There are some men whose circles expand to their extended family and their friends. And then there's some that extend even beyond that. And even further than that is tribe, community, state, country, whatever the case is, world. And so there are in that concept, it started me on this path of intentionally seeking what kind of a person, specifically what kind of a man I was under that conceptual archetype. So am I the self-centered man who only cares about myself and my circle? Am I the man who only cares about my non-existent nuclear family? Am I the kind of man that cares about my friends and my extended family and anybody close to me? Or am I the guy that goes above and beyond to save the world? And so I became very intentional in trying to determine which circle or which size of circle I wanted to be. And it was actually my best friend who, in a low moment, I was venting to him. We were having a counseling session, for lack of a better term. I seek counsel with my closest friends, and I respect them for various reasons, and I seek different types of counsel from everybody. Everybody serves a purpose for me. And so I was on his back porch, and we were smoking cigars, and we were drinking whiskey. And I remember explaining to him that I feel bad that I honestly don't care about these different groups of people. Like, they don't, like, people come to me and they're like, don't you feel bad? Don't you have remorse? Don't you have, compassion for these people? And while I can sympathize with a situation or a difficulty or a problem that they're going through, it doesn't generate thumos in me, or it doesn't inspire me to move towards an action to save everybody. And I was lamenting to him, like, this is a problem. Like, I feel like I should be better. Like, I should be caring about more people. I should be. And I had never shared with him this intentional questing concept of this circle methodology. And in that moment, he actually told me, he said, your greatest strength is that all of your energy, all of your resources, all of your time, passion, knowledge, all of that is spent on those closest to you. You're fiercely loyal to those in that circle. And in that moment, he doesn't know this, and if he watches this, it will be the first time he knows this. But in that moment, he enlightened me and gave me what I had been searching for, which was, yes, like I'm the guy I'm the third circle. I'm not self-absorbed. I'm not just for my nuclear, but there's a tribal mentality that I follow where my circle is those who are closest to me, friends, family, those who are loyal to me, that have earned my respect, that have earned my loyalty. And that is where I pour all of my heart and soul and body and resources into. And obviously, if like where possible, right, there are transient people within that circle that move through and can, get access to those resources, but when it comes first, push comes to shove and the wolves are at the gate, they're not my priority. My priority are those within that circle. And I realized that, people can come and go into that circle, but if you earn my respect and my loyalty, I didn't realize that. He told me that, and I latched onto it and I loved it, and I doubled down, and it made things simpler. It made things more prioritized. It made things easier. And so that was my journey towards figuring out my own filtration system, my own dichotomy and priority sets. But even within that, like it didn't actually develop into an outside noise filtration system. That was just me validating and confirming, like, yes, I'm this type of person. This is the circle that I follow. This is the loyalty that I have, etc. But I was still accepting all the outside influences onto my value systems and critiquing myself based on people that not necessarily fit my orchestra, if you caught the Chip Baker podcast. And so it wasn't until I started reading Jack Donovan that he gave me the articulation of set the perimeter. That is his premise. And it's, I'm reading his new book, Fire in the Dark, Men and Gods. And one of the things he mentions in, I believe, his preface is that while writing that, he felt like it came from somewhere else, something higher than himself. And I felt that way about all of the virtues that he brought up in Way of Men and A More Complete Beast and all of his books, really. And Set the Perimeter just had this very tactile, anecdotal, empirical place that made sense to me, and it clicked with me. And within that, I then took his words and developed my own perimeter of using Set the Perimeter, my own definition and concept. And so while there's the priority of resources, the finite nature of energy and time and physical resources, emotion, so on and so forth, which is what my circle analogy from a moment ago is about. It didn't answer what to do when things come into the perimeter or things are trying to assail the perimeter from external. It did not answer what to do when moving beyond the perimeter. So when you're moving outside of that tribe, when you're moving outside of that scope. And so it was limited in that definition. And so having read Jack Donovan and saw the set the perimeter, it afforded the principles under that guise and his definition of answering all the above. It answered the circle, which is setting the perimeter, but it also answered what to do when things are assailing the perimeter, what to do when you're extending outside the perimeter. And that's where I started to really define and fine-tune that concept. So that's the history of Set the Perimeter, and that's where that comes from. It's not my words, it's Jack Donovan words, but it is my concept and my premise in the sense of how I leverage it and how I encourage others to leverage it. And then also, once you understand how to leverage it, much like what I did with Jack Donovan's words, I expanded on it. That I took what I felt was applicable to me and I made it mine. And that's what I encourage everybody to do, is take the good stuff and then make it applicable to you, because I'm on the same journey as everybody else. I'm just showing you the pieces that I know or have seen or would have worked for me. So what are the prerequisites of setting a perimeter? And I've touched on this a little bit here and there. I've definitely touched on it in my videos, in my earlier videos. I've touched on it in some of the newsletters. But first and foremost, you have to have your set virtues. I believe that that's strength, courage, mastery, and honor, which also is aligned to Jack Donovan and Ryan Mickler. But when you look at the foundational virtues that I set out, they're all compounded. They're all necessary. Without them, you can't have a perimeter. So you obviously need those as a prerequisite. But the second and just as important, maybe a little less important, but not by much, just because you would need the first 4 foundational in order to make this one a reality as in itself, is you have to sit with yourself and really understand your value system, your principles, your the lines you're not willing to cross, the hills you're willing to die on, the things that you are willing to say, these are my boundaries and these are the things that I'm not willing to budge on. And the reason for that is because you can't have a perimeter if you don't actually understand what your boundaries are. I mean, that's like completely the antithesis of having a perimeter, which is a set of boundaries. And if you don't understand your own personal boundaries, how could you possibly teach them or expect others to follow within your boundaries? And so it's important to sit with yourself and understand what your value system looks like. For example, I take a lot from historical societies. Like me personally, I believe in honor codes such as the Chivalric Code or Bushido. I also believe in the commandments that I believe transcend time, space, and religion. Things like don't kill, don't murder, don't steal, don't cheat, don't lie, things like that. I believe in those things. That's my foundational virtue, and I strive to live that in every moment that I can. And once you set that foundation and you try and live to that foundation, a lot of the other stuff, like within the construct of setting the perimeter, becomes very linear, becomes very easy. So then, how do you do that? Well, I believe that the easiest way to do that is to be 100% yourself, and experiment with things that you do or don't do, don't like. Be honest, first and foremost with yourself, and then with people closest to you. This has 2 functions. The first, you'll quickly learn how people perceive what you're saying. It'll give you a soundboard, and that's where the strength and courage comes in, because you have to be able to kind of take that hit on the chin if you're going to do that. And then the second thing is it'll quickly help you identify people that would connect with your perimeter and people that don't. So that, those are the prerequisites. And then, and I truly believe that those are the only 2 necessities for setting a perimeter, is foundational virtues and understanding where your principles are. Outside of that, pretty much everything can fall into place. And obviously there's some nuances within those 2 areas, especially if your virtues are different, right? Like, I'm not saying mine is an end all be all. I'm just saying that this has worked for me and this is what I believe men to strive for. And so you have to identify those 2 foundational virtues and what your principles are. And then an optional is to identify people that you can seek counsel with, because having a soundboard of any kind from people you respect or somebody you look up to is extremely, extremely beneficial. It'll save you time, save you heartache, save you contention, save you resentment. Just having people you can trust that will tell you exactly what you need, not what you want to hear, but what you need to hear to keep you on the right path. So then, once you have those 2 things, how do you go about setting the perimeter? Well, first and foremost is living honestly. Once you've set your virtues, you have to make sure that you're striving to execute and exemplify those virtues to the best of your ability. Once you set your principles, you also need to make sure that your compass and your morality and your decisions are as close to that line of your principles and foundational virtues as you possibly can. Because one of the biggest things that I found is anytime I've strayed from those foundational virtues and or strayed from my principles, and for want of money or to avoid a conflict or whatever the case is, I decided to go against my gut and say, yeah, this is fine. it takes a lot to recoil from that. Like, you don't immediately, if you're honest with yourself, it will drain you. You'll feel it. You won't want to look at yourself in the mirror. You'll play that scenario over and over again in your head. So you need, the easiest way to set that perimeter is start living by the principles and the virtues that you set for yourself, and be very deliberate about it. One of the things that I get a lot is that I'm very intense, because I believe that a man says what he's going to do, he needs to stick to it. Like, that's something that was instilled in me. And so I get that. I'm very passionate. I get wound up really quickly. And there's certain things on a principle level that if you cross that line, it may seem very simple to you, but I'm going to call you on it as a very deliberate thing for me, because I want to make sure that that person knows, like, hey, I don't play that. Anecdotally, I have a buddy that's very similar, and it's why we connect, but we see things differently. Like, I don't mind, because I don't really have a great relationship with my mother. I mean, it's working, but it's not like a strong bond. So if somebody's making like your mama jokes or whatever, as long as it's not too disrespectful, I may let things slide and it doesn't bother me too much. However, he has a very strong bond with his mother, and he's very like, do not make your mama jokes. Like, if you do that and you continue to disrespect me and my mother, I will knock you out. And he makes no bones about it. Like, and so there's a mutual respect there with he and I, where like, I've made the mistake of making a yo mama joke just out of camaraderie. It just flowed out, and I immediately realized my mistake, and I apologized to him out of respect, and I never made that mistake again. Hence why he's never, for that reason, tried to punch me in the face. We spar all the time, so it's a little bit of a joke, but those are the things that you need to identify for yourself that will help set that perimeter. Like, I know him, that is a principle for him. It does not change. Like, nobody can walk up and be like, hey, your mama this, and he will be okay with it. Not a single person on this planet, because that is his line. And I respect that. And I will tell people on his behalf, if they try to say something, I will jump ahead of him and make it to where he doesn't even need to, because I understand that that's his principle. And so once you start living that principle, the people that if you're honest with yourself and then honest externally with other people, they will start to fall into place. People that will protect your principles for you, so that if you bridge that respect and camaraderie with another man, like, there will be people that will step in your place. They will protect your character. They will, you will develop loyalty through just pure honesty, because it's such a rare thing today for men to be honest and devout to their principles, that when other men see it, it's something that becomes admirable. Now, that being said, I'm not saying go and be an asshole. Like, don't just start like, I don't like that, and then you just end up going towards the left side of the spectrum where offensive becomes a word. That's not what I'm saying at all. But you need to make a decision and start determining, like, if you have a principle, hold to your principle, and then make decisions based on that principle. Like, maybe you don't hang out with them. Maybe you don't go shop at that place anymore. Maybe you don't talk to those people anymore. Maybe you keep it very, very casual. So, like, instead of talking to them like friends, you talk to them like a client or a customer or just a passerby, and you smile and you nod, but you don't get engaged at a deeper level with them, because they obviously have a fundamental disconnect with you. So living your truth, I hate that too. I just said it. It's a sign of the times. There's no such thing as your truth. There's just truth. But living what feels right to you from your values, your perspective, your opinions, not even opinions, your foundational virtues and your foundational principles, living to that as honestly as you possibly can will set the precedence of you starting to build your foundation, build your perimeter. The second thing is that same person that I was just talking about, who has my respect and doesn't, he has that hard wall of like, nobody talks about his mom. He once told me in a conversation, because I was going through a winter season, and I was worried about the social repercussions. And he very seriously sat me down, and we were drinking beers and hanging out, and he was like, listen, the people that care, it won't matter. And to the people that it matters to, they don't matter. Like, the people that care about stuff like this, they shouldn't matter to you. And that reinforced that whole filtration system of like, if you are 100% living honest with yourself and living as close to your ideals and your virtues and your foundational principles as you possibly can, then the people that don't agree with you really don't matter. Because obviously they're the antithesis of what you're trying to accomplish, or the antithesis of your personality or your value system. And so there's no obligation for you to make sense to them, and vice versa. Like, you can try, but if you guys are talking different languages, it's not going to translate. The most extreme example that I give of this, and I talk to a lot of people about this, and it's a shock thing to get stuck in people's mind, which is why I use it, is a non-cannibal talking to a cannibal. They have severely differing and conflicting moral values. They have different principles entirely. The consumption of human flesh, murder of a human life, extinguishing a human life for food, for many people that are non-cannibals, I would assume, with the exception of sociopaths and psychopaths, that's a very big deal, extinguishing life. But to a cannibal, that's just dinner. And I actually should preface this with, I'm not an expert on cannibalism, so I don't actually know how their honor system and structural organizational system works for determining who gets eaten or whatever. I've never really wanted to know. But it identifies and articulates very clearly a separation of foundational values. Now, you take that same scenario of like a non-cannibal and a cannibal, and that cannibal thinks you're a coward because you won't eat human. Does it really matter that they think you're a coward? Well, no, because you obviously have differing constructs of being a coward. And so this is kind of how I highlight it's the same thing as people you don't know or people you don't care about judging you or having an issue with you. You know nothing of their virtues or their principles, and so therefore you have no way of comprehending and understanding what makes them feel the way they do about you, and therefore it shouldn't really matter to you, because it could very easily be not personal to you at all. You just have conflicting virtues, and that's just going to happen. Like, that's just human life. That's just the way we work. That's ego, id, psyche, self-affirmation. I mean, psychiatry has been researching deeply into this for years, and they're barely just scratching the surface of how humans tick. And so, by living to your virtues and your virtues and principles, your virtues and your principles, you're going to automatically start creating your own perimeter by design, because it's going to create a polarity between people that you click with and people you don't click with, because you have just subsequently different value systems. So again, set your virtues, set your principles, live as honest as possible to those. And in doing so, you're going to automatically polarize and create a filtration system. Now, there's nothing too far to one end of the spectrum is ever a good thing. So if you become too hard-nosed on your principles, then you're probably not going to have a perimeter, because you're not going to be flexible enough to grow. You're going to be stagnant, and then it's going to fall apart and it's going to become fragile. And if you're too soft on it, then the boundaries are unclear, and so the perimeter never thrives. So you have to find that dichotomy for you in whatever perimeter you're trying to set. And so from that, you then get, say you've done that. You say you've figured out your virtues, you've figured out your principles, you're living your as close to that line as possible to be the ideal version of you based on your virtues and principles. You start seeing a polarization of people, some that work with it, some that don't work with it. People are falling away. So what do you do from there? And this is going to be where nobody can give you the answer from there. This is where you trial and error, anecdotal evidence on your life and your experience and how you connect with people. You're gonna find yourself defining that perimeter. And so from that point, once you've done that groundwork that I just discussed, now it's the hard part. Now it's deciding which challenges you're willing to go through, which conflicts you want to avoid by playing nice or being tactful, put the business face on, different, time and place. Like there's a lot of variables that now play into it. Now, just because you have the basics, it's going to be, a journey just for like anything. It's going to be you trying to fine tune it and figure out how to navigate the different types of people, because there's different, pathologies or different attitudes or different methodologies of approaching this. And you got to find your own way. You got to find your own voice in this. But eventually you're going to get to a point where you've got kind of the semblance of a perimeter. Maybe you found 2 to 5 people, maybe more if you're really a social butterfly, that you see are very trustworthy. They're part of your counsel. So this is where the pitfalls come in. Once you've done all this, then I mentioned one pitfall, which is going too hard on one side or too soft on the other side. That's one pitfall. But the other is like being very deliberate in your counsel. As I mentioned, now that you've kind of created this rough spectrum of setting your perimeter, now you get to decide whose counsel you prioritize and how you approach those discussions and how you leverage their strengths and their weaknesses and things of that nature. And all relationships are reciprocal, so it should go the other way as well. But the pitfall in choosing your counsel is the same thing as setting your foundations. It's like, if you want people that are always on your case and telling you that you don't know what you're talking about, you're off your rocker, you're crazy, well, then you've probably picked people that are your counsel that have a mismatch of values. And so you run the risk of always failing, because there's a famous drawing that says, the American education system is like, all right, to me, fair, everybody gets the same test, and it's fish and monkeys and elephants and cheetahs and things, and they're like, all right, go climb that tree, that's the test. So it's the same thing. If your test is through counsel on whether or not you're doing the right thing, but they have a different set of values, you're going to fail every time. So you have to be deliberate in making sure that the counsel that you seek align with you. But on the flip side of that, you don't want to be so aligned with the people that you seek counsel that they're just yes men, or they're just telling you what you want to hear, because then you have no growth. You have no productive conflict. You have no productive tension. And so you end up just talking in circles, and you end up creating the echo chamber, which is what last week's newsletter was about, because you literally are creating a space where you're just getting your ego stroked. And one of the reasons that newsletter was written, and one of the reasons that this podcast episode is being shot, is because I was accused of doing that. That's where that misunderstanding came from, is like, I'm trying to create a bunch of yes men and echo chambers to tell me I'm a great guy and that I'm a man among men. And it's just, that's not what I'm trying to do. And anybody that's close to me knows that, because frankly, they get pretty brutal with me when I'm really out of pocket. And I appreciate that. That's what I seek. That's why I go to them. When I'm vulnerable, I open myself up to them to know how to handle me. And they've earned my trust and my respect, because as my counsel, they are the ones that know, the dichotomy of, this is where I can get really hard on Tim, but this is also where I can get very, I need to be kind of soothing or empowering and just letting, because I have an ego and it gets bruised, and I have pride. And so if I just had a person just constantly telling me like, dude, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, I'm just going to get pissed. Like, I'm not going to listen to him anymore. So my counsel has very deliberate. It's not luck. It's something that I've cultivated, and it takes time. And you got to put the effort in. And luckily, the lucky part is that I have had an opportunity to be around a lot of different types of people, and I am afforded the ability to articulate the way I can, so that I can be understood in a very, very positive way. So be sure that when you're choosing your counsel, when you're setting your perimeter, that you have an equal balance of people that are willing to tell you the hard shit that you may not want to hear, but they balance it out with the good part of it too, and encouraging you and trying to help you grow, instead of just trying to shit on all the stuff you're trying to do. And that's the other thing too, is the other pitfall is I've seen people that I share this information with, and they try and force it. They try and make it very mechanical when they're trying to develop their counsel. And I'm guilty of this too, because I'm an impatient person, and temperance is definitely something I've been working on, even though it's one of my main ideals. It's something that's eluded me for pretty much my whole life, probably because I'm impatient. And it's one of those things where, like, you can't just walk up to somebody and be like, hey, I want you to be in my counsel, and know that they align with you, and that, like, You also can't be like, hey, what are your thoughts on murder? It makes things very awkward, and then it becomes very mechanical, and then you can either be looked at as the weird person, or um, it has no context. So you don't want to just like rush into things. You want to seek opportunities to pry or to get into deep conversation. Um, and it takes time. You have to be very intentional. You can't force that. And the more you try and force it, the more opportunities you have to screw that up. And I'll tell you a story. I had a person that I thought we gelled super good. I was early in this kind of growth and trying to keep friends and wanting to develop a community that I liked and liked being around and could help me. And they turned out to be real skeezy. They talked a big game, but they didn't actually deliver on any things that they talked about. And so I felt very let down. I felt like I was lied to. I felt just all around it was a bad experience. And I ended up cutting that person out, but not before it kind of blew up and it got to a point where like I was ready to throw down with this person because they did everything that on my line of principle. They crossed every line at every chance, no matter how many chances I gave them. They kept taking advantage. And that's on me because I tried to rush it. I thought that we had good and this is another guy, right? Like it sounds weird because it's a platonic relationship, but it takes just as much effort. Like you need to know who you're surrounding yourself with, because if I kept that person in my circle, if I kept them in my perimeter, they would have usurped that space in my counsel to their own malignant needs. And that's what happened. This person would take all the information that I would share with them in counsel, and then they would take and try and sabotage me at work. Then they try and sabotage me, so I'm sharing that as a story of caution, this cautionary tale. Obviously it's fine. It was a learning experience. I know what I messed up on. I don't blame that person. Like we just weren't aligned. That is what it is. I rarely even am impacted by that history either, other than, it comes up when you're trying to tell a story. But as a cautionary tale, it was really important because it was a great learning experience for me, is that organic approach of really listening to your gut and understanding it and making sure to set those boundaries. I didn't do any of that stuff. And because I didn't do any of that stuff, it ended poorly for me. And, I gotta walk with that, and that's okay. And that's going to be part of the process. And so the other thing is the last pitfall before I let you go, because I did want to make this kind of short. The last pitfall that I'll leave you with is just that, is don't get so either stuck in your ways or stuck in the idea that you need people that you end up going against your principles and your foundations in an effort to keep people around. Let them fall away. It's okay for them to fall away. And this is a hard lesson for a lot of us, because we've all been, well, not all of us, but a lot of us have been brought up to kind of measure our self-worth with popularity, or self-worth by, validation from external people and things like that. And there's a lot to unpack, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody if you're going through some tough times, because I have some experience. I'd be happy to share it with you. But we've been brought up in this society to kind of validate ourselves against outside perceptions, and that's why it's so important to set your perimeter properly, because it fine-tunes that who matters to get that validation. Because humans, I believe, are physiologically and psychologically set up to understand outside validation points from a community, because we are communal creatures. But it's who matters that is important, because if you have a close 5 people and they love you, then the other 5,000, 5 million, it doesn't matter how many people, if they don't like you, who cares? You have your 5 and you're good. Not everybody's built like that. It's going to vary with people, but obviously I'm talking about a very nuanced thing. But the pitfall is, if you're too stalwart, you'll never have a community. Unless, of course, your circle and your perimeter is you, in which case I'm not talking to you because you're not communal by choice. I would actually like to talk to you if you're like that. I'm curious about your perspective. So if you are one of those people who believes in, I'm just trying to keep to myself and it's all about me. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like, if that's your perspective, I'd love to have a conversation with you. So either comment or email me or DM me. That'd be great. But other than that, we are communal creatures. We're built that way for a reason. The whole idea of it takes a village, that it does take a village, but you need to pick the village. You can't have the entire world be your village. It's just not going to work. So don't get stuck chasing people away because you just don't want to do the work, but also don't get stuck keeping people around because you're afraid that you won't have anybody to align with you. So that's the last pitfall. So this is a very deep topic. I tried to break it down as quickly as I possibly could. I apologize that this one went a little bit longer. I have been trying to keep them a little bit more truncated. But there's a lot of actionable intel in here, a lot of tactical content that you can use. If you have any questions, you actually want to pursue setting your perimeter, determining out how to, actually set virtues, determine what's important for you, how to determine principles, what's important for you. I have some activities that I can share with you guys. Just reach out to me one-on-one. That may help kind of give you a pathway that way, or a direction, orient you towards defining those things. Or if you want more explanation on some more pitfalls, because there's many that I've gone through. If you want more details or just want to have a soundboard, you know where to reach me. Instagram, Facebook. You can find me on any of those platforms, obviously here on YouTube, and then feel free to email me. I'll put all of my links in there. But on that note, that concludes our episode on setting the perimeter. And as always, I really hope you guys go out there and strive to be the ideal version of yourself. The world is in great need of strong, capable, and moral men. I truly believe that, and we will one day see that shift. I also believe that. I believe Heroes Veritas will be, if anything, just a spark. So really hope you guys have a great day. Wherever you're listening from, on whatever platform you're listening from, and I hope to see you guys at the camping trip.